منا عبادة إله واحد
ما فيه من ماض وآت صلوا عليه وسلموا
على جميع المرسلين
صلوا عليه وسلموا
على جميع المرسلين.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another new edition of Africa Today, where we get you the latest taking place on the African scene. And our main topic today will be the Egyptian-African relations, but we'll first have a look at this report. Egyptian-African trade ties have been a priority throughout history. Analysts say that over the past few years, a number of African economies have grown considerably and continue to grow, highlighting the importance of developing trade among African states. More details in the following report.
2014, Africa's population stood at a little over 1 billion people with a total GDP of 2.5 trillion US dollars. In 2013, African exports to the world reached nearly 600 billion US dollars, while imports totaled 605 billion US dollars. A recent study of Egypt's trade relations with Africa examined trade developments with various economic blocs and trading partners during 2010 to 2015. This report provided a summary to the study's key findings, as well as an analysis of the current state of Egyptian-African trade and investment relations. The report outlines Egypt's trade relations with Africa. It shows persistent actions to support and enhance economic, political, and cultural integration in the continent. It says this has been demonstrated through a series of bilateral and multilateral free trade agreements, technical and industrial support, as well as hosting the RIA to promote investment opportunities in the COMESA. In June 2015, the tripartite free trade agreement was signed in Sharm el-Sheikh, symbolizing Egypt's return to the African community after its membership was suspended from the African Union in 2013.
Welcome back. The United Nations Security Council on Tuesday voted to renew sanctions on a number of individuals allegedly obstructing a peace deal in South Sudan. This came weeks after the formation of a transitional government of national unity. Details in the following report.
A UN Security Council resolution which welcomed the recent formation of a unity government in South Sudan extended sanctions for a year, saying much was yet to be done to achieve a peaceful settlement of the conflict that killed tens of thousands of people and displaced over 2 million. The 15-member body's decision comes after an agreement to pursue the sanctions was reached with Russia on Friday, 27th of May, in which the draft resolution followed two technical rollovers that briefly extended the sanctions regime. The sanctions renewal was delayed due to the return to Juba of the opposition leader and current First Vice President Riek Machar and the formation of the Transitional Government of National Unity in late April. However, some members of the UN Security Council believed that the Council required more time to consider an appropriate approach to sanctions, including a potential arms embargo, while the political situation was in considerable flux and the threat of additional sanctions could affect the calculations of the key decision makers. Also, members were of the view that the additional time might allow the Council to formulate a more unified strategy given the divergent views on sanctions. Hence, brief technical rollover resolutions were adopted. There is general recognition that the enormous difficulties still lie ahead in the implementation of South Sudan's peace deal. These hurdles include, among others, the lack of political will by the parties in the country's transitional government of national unity to resolve on the controversial 28 states, which the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, and UN wanted suspended but has not done till now.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're still watching Africa Today live on Nile TV International, and our main topic today will be Egyptian-African relations, and we're glad to be joined here at the studio by Mr. Mohamed Khouly, international media expert. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Sir, Egypt and Kenya have recently signed a memorandum of understanding. How do you weigh the importance of Egyptian-Kenyan relations?
In fact, I have to view the Egyptian-Kenyan relations through a wider spectrum, which is Egyptian-African relations.
Right.
And I know that there are historic relations between Nairobi and Cairo, and these relations extend to the epoch of the liberation struggle for independence, political independence. In my generation, that was when we were so young, in the 50s and the early 60s, we used to learn about and to hear about Jomo Kenyatta,
right.
The historic leader of Kenya's emancipation and liberation movement from the British imperialism. Kenyatta's name, I can say that it was a kind of a household name
right.
in Egypt, all over the place. And we used to see his picture and the relations between him and President Nasser in Egypt. And therefore we were just following with our hopes the struggle, the national struggle in Kenya until they got their own independence. In the same time, we have to remind ourselves and remind even our African brothers that Kenya, Nairobi in particular, the capital, is the site of the UNEP, United Nations Environment Program.
Right.
It is the international organization which supervises and takes care of the issues of environment with its importance all over the world. The person, the man, the character who established this organization in Nairobi all over was an Egyptian scientist, Dr. Mustafa Tulba, who passed away last year only. And we used to hear, when I was working in the United Nations in New York, we used to hear his efforts in order to establish the organization and takes its site in the capital of Kenya.
Right.
In the same time, we are looking forward to reinforce our relations with Kenya in particular, you see, not only through a memo of understanding, which is a very important step, but we aspire to broaden the spectrum, as I said, to encompass all other sides and faces of relations, not only trade relations, not only economic relations, but also, as you know, cultural relations and human relations. And we feel that we need much more warmth in the relation between Cairo and Nairobi.
Right. So if you move on to Egyptian-African ties in general, how do you weigh the current Egyptian-African relations? I
think here the administration in Cairo, the presidency and the Foreign Affairs Ministry are aspiring to reinforce and to, as I said, widen the scope of these relations. And one of the symptoms, the very healthy symptoms in the steps which Cairo is taking now, was the establishment last year and maybe 2 years ago, the establishment of a kind of an agency which is called the Agency for the widening or for the cooperation in the field of development. We want to cooperate in the field of development, not only in the economic field, because we are brothers, you see. And when I say brothers, it's not just the emotional side. Most of us share the waters of the river Nile.
Right.
In the same time, most of us share the dreams of stepping forward and trying to deal with our future, the future of our peoples. And I think Egypt, thanks to its past relations with the African countries, in the same time, the partnership in our dreams of development and the progress, I think these are the foundations on which we can build new relations in the economic field and the cultural field. In the same time, we have to reinforce our unity vis-a-vis the international arena. I
Right.
mean, the African group in the United Nations is a very effective group which has its own word in the international issues, just as the non-aligned movement and the Latin American movement and the EU, everything. I think we have a lot of potentials, and we have to invest this potential in order to go forward with our relations.
Right. Sir, you've mentioned the Nile, and of course we cannot deny the importance of the river Nile. How can you, how do you assess the importance of the Nile, and how do you think it has contributed to strengthening ties between Egypt and other Nile Basin countries?
I mean, contrary to a lot of things, myself, humbly speaking, I look at the Nile not only as water, partnership in water. It is a culture, the Nile culture, that people who are living along the river Nile with its different tributaries, you see, I think they share this culture of the water, the agriculture, and let's say the psychology of partnership. I mean, in Egypt, for example, in Upper Egypt, the person who lives in Upper Egypt and works in order to have his agriculture and have his to irrigate his fields thanks to the water in the river Nile, I think he has this kind of brotherhood, of partnership with his counterpart in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Uganda. You see, this creates a common cause, that these people have a certain common cause. They have to service, and they have to keep it, and they have to grow and implement the spirit of comradeship, spirit of partnership, and spirit of pride, that all of us, regardless of our borders, our boundaries, the name of our countries, regardless of this, we are brothers in the river, in the waters, or in the river Nile's culture, as I said.
Right. Of course, the relationship between Egypt and Africa and other African countries is a win-win situation. How important is it for Egypt to maintain close ties with other African countries?
It still is very important, not only in these days, you see, but all over our history. And in the 20th century, I think all of us, we were under the occupation. We are under the tyranny of the British occupation, and we had this partnership of struggle against the occupants, and our stories are similar to each other. We were against the British in Cairo, against the British in Sudan, against the British in Kenya, let's say. As far as West Africa was against the occupant, the French occupants, as far as Ethiopia was struggling against the Italian occupation, as far as some parts of the southern Africa were against the Spanish and Portuguese. And then we had the big story of the struggle against the apartheid, against the tyranny of the Boers, who are the white settlers in South Africa, and we had the symbol of all these things personified in Mr. Nelson Mandela. When he came to Egypt some years ago, he admitted that he was looking at Cairo in the 60s and in the 50s and the 60s as a beacon for the struggle for the independence and national liberation all over Africa.
Right. How do you think intra-African trade can boost the development of the continent as a whole?
I think there is something which Africa is called in a kind of a euphemism or a kind of a metaphorical way. It is the virgin continent. Virgin here, in my opinion, in the opinion of some scholars, means that it has a lot of potential which is not tapped yet, which has not been exploited yet. It is so good. I think during the colonial era, there was an over-exploitation of Africa's potential. I mean, the oil, petroleum, I mean, the agricultural potentials, other metals and everything. Even sometimes in West Africa, there is the cobalt and the uranium. So these things are still there, thank God. And I think we have, as African brothers, you see, and partners, we have to cooperate with each other. Egypt has a kind of an advanced know-how capabilities. These capabilities should be put at for the benefit of our African brothers. We have a lot of engineers, experts, planners, you see, with experience, a lot of experience. They should go to the African countries, and we should even invite some of African brothers to come to Cairo to interact with our people and to teach us about the potentials in their countries. In the same time, we have to work in the spirit of partnership, not in the spirit of just partners in commercial partners.
Right.
That's the only, we have to work for the future, not only for the present.
Right, so what are the obstacles blocking Africa from becoming an economic bloc? Like, for example, the European, the EU.
Well, as I told you, Africa was suffering until the 60s, the early 60s, were under the occupation and living a very miserable colonial epoch. And the emancipation started in the 60s. And once I heard one of the African leaders, the historic leaders, Mr. Muallimu, Julius Nyerere, he told us in an assembly or a gathering. It was in the capital of Niger. He told us that after the independence, the African people tried to imitate their occupants in the colonial period. And he said that we have to create our own, the Africans, I mean, our own way of trying to develop our countries and trying to cooperate with each other. I think the African Union has a lot of steps to take after the steps which has been taken during the last period. And I think they are on the right track. And as far as Egypt, you know, 2 years ago, I think they have frozen our membership in some of the bodies of the African Union. But now Egypt has regained its seats. And I think, as I told you, with our experience, which we have gained since the 19th century and the 20th century, we can put this experience to the benefit of our African brothers, and this can create not only a bloc, because the word bloc, politically speaking, means a kind of, you know, a hostile side. No, it is a kind of a union, of a unity. People who are living with each other, they have common interests and common future, and they want to cooperate with the outer world, not as an opposing bloc, but as a bloc for cooperation, for peace and prosperity.
Right, sir, in very brief, how do you explain the need to invite foreign countries to solve some African problems like the situation with Mali, Somalia and Central Africa, for example?
If you mean the situation as far as the military situation, I think here it's not only to invite, it's not good in my opinion, not good to invite this country or that country to help us. It should be according to United Nations resolutions, which should be issued by the General Assembly and therefore the Security Council. Mm-hmm. We should have a kind of international consensus in order to solve or tackle our problems. But if you mean we invite some countries, some friendly countries, to cooperate with us or to help us in our developmental problems, I think there is some countries who are doing this, like China, for example, Brazil, for example. Maybe you can invite other European countries and Arab countries from the Middle East. This is another thing. But from the military point of view, I think things should be calculated meticulously and should be according to international consensus, which should be issued by the United Nations and the Security Council.
Right, Mr. Mohamed Khouly, international media expert, many thanks for your presence and for your insights, sir.
Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, with this we wrap up this edition of Africa Today. Many thanks for watching and stay tuned for more coming up here on Nile TV International.